Elias Ward wasn't afraid of the dark. At least that's what he always told himself on long drives into the Washington backcountry. He loved the quiet, the trees, the cold smell of moss and river stones. Camping alone was his reset button, a way to silence all the city noise his brain refused to turn off. But on the third night of this trip, the silence felt wrong. He'd set up camp near a narrow creek, miles from any official trail. His only neighbors were a few scatterings of deer tracks and the distant echo of an owl. The sun had slipped behind the ridgeline, and the forest sank into a liquid blackness that swallowed his lantern's glow. Elias sat by the fire, poking at the embers. The woods felt too still. No crickets, no rustling, no wind brushing through the fir branches. He checked his phone. No signal. Not even one bar. Perfect, he muttered, trying to sound amused. A branch snapped somewhere behind his tent. Elias froze. The pop had been sharp, not the brittle crumble of a twig under a squirrel, but the clean, heavy break of something large. He slowly turned toward the sound, staring into the tree line. Nothing. He waited. Another crack echoed, closer this time, followed by a low, breathy exhale. Elias's skin prickled. He tightened his grip on the metal fire poker, suddenly hyper-aware of how exposed he was. One man, a dying fire, and a circle of darkness pressing closer every second. Probably a deer, he whispered. He didn't believe himself. Then he heard it, a heavy footstep. Not two, one. Like a single enormous creature shifting its weight, Elias stood up slowly. "Hey!" he shouted into the dark, projecting his voice with a confidence he did not feel. "Go on! Get!" The forest swallowed his words. Something answered. A long, deep, guttural rumble rolled out from the trees, vibrating in his ribcage like the growl of an animal that knew it didn't need to be afraid. Elias backed up toward the fire. Panic fluttered in his throat. Bears didn't sound like that. Cougars didn't either. He knew these woods well enough to recognize local wildlife. But this was different wrong. Something primal. He grabbed his flashlight and fired the beam into the trees. For a second, he saw nothing. Just an endless wall of trunks and shadow. Then the light bounced off something. Two reflective eyes far above the height of any animal he had seen in these forests. 12 feet up? Maybe more. The eyes blinked slowly, deliberately. Elias's breath hitched. The eyes didn't dart or flinch. They just watched him. Another exhale gusted from the darkness. A deep, wet, nasal blast, like the snort of something massive. Elias stumbled backward. The thing stepped forward. He didn't see its body completely, just the faint outline of something colossal, furred and towering. The trees around it seemed too small, too fragile to contain it. Something about the way it moved made Elias's stomach twist. It was heavy but silent, its steps cushioned like a predator's. He fumbled into his tent, grabbed his hatchet, and backed toward his car. The fire sputtered behind him, as if it too wanted to shrink away. The creature let out a sound. Not a roar, not a call, but a single sharp bark, explosive and commanding. A warning. Elias stopped moving. His body obeyed the creature before his mind caught up. The forest held its breath. Then the creature began circling him. He could hear its steps. Slow, pacing, deliberate. Each footfall pressed impossibly deep into the forest floor, crunching through detritus like it was nothing. Elias pivoted in place, trying to keep the flashlight pointed toward the sound, but the creature was too fast. Every time he swung the light, the steps came from behind him instead. It was playing with him. It knew he was afraid. It liked it. Elias felt his knees weakening. "Please," he whispered, though he didn't know if he was talking to the creature, to the forest, or to himself. A hand, massive, wide, fur-thick, impossibly human, pressed against the back of his tent, crushing the fabric inward. The poles bent with a soft, metallic groan. Elias stared, paralyzed, as 5 enormous fingers traced slowly down the nylon, like something savoring the first touch of its prey. Then came the sound he would never forget, a whisper, not a human one, but close, too close. "Go. Home." Elias dropped the hatchet. The hand slid away, the footsteps receded, and the night swallowed whatever had been watching him. But Elias knew it hadn't left. It was letting him know it could reach him any time it wanted, and now it wanted him gone. Elias didn't sleep. He sat upright in his camping chair until the fire died to a soft red glow, staring into the tree line where those impossible eyes had watched him. Every time the wind brushed a branch, he flinched. Every time an ember cracked, he jerked upright, convinced the creature had returned. By dawn, he felt hollowed out. The forest, washed in pale morning light, looked normal again, innocent even. Birds chattered overhead. A squirrel skittered up a tree, oblivious to the horror that had stalked this clearing just hours ago. Elias forced himself to stand. His back ached, and every muscle felt pulled taut. He had to get out. He'd pack up fast, drive down the forest road, and get to civilization. Maybe he'd call someone, a ranger, a biologist, hell, even a journalist, if anyone would believe him. When he turned toward his tent, his stomach clenched. The fabric was shredded in long, deliberate slashes, not ragged like from a bear's claws, but cut, each one nearly 3 feet long and parallel. The nylon hung in ribbons, fluttering with the morning breeze. His backpack had been turned over. His cookpot had been hurled 20 feet from the fire pit, dented like someone had crushed it between their hands. But the strangest, most chilling sight was the ground. All around the campsite, the soil was stamped with enormous footprints. Elias crouched, hands shaking. He placed his palm inside one. His entire hand fit easily within the ball of the print, with room to spare. Each step sank nearly 6 inches deep into the earth. "Jesus," he whispered. He scanned the perimeter. The tracks circled the camp again and again, looping in chaotic spirals, as if the creature had spent hours pacing, watching, examining, studying. A cold dread crept through him. It hadn't left him alone after that whisper. It had stayed. It had walked circles around him while he sat by the fire, too scared to move. The thought made his vision blur. He shoved the remnants of his gear into his cooler, zipped up what was left of his pack, and hurried to the car. The sooner he got out, the better. But when he reached the driver's door, he froze again. Something had smeared across the window. At first he thought it was mud, until he saw the texture. It was a single wide streak, oily and dark, like a mixture of dirt and something organic. And embedded in it were coarse black hairs nearly 6 inches long. Elias staggered back. The mark was too intentional. A message, a claim. The forest around him suddenly felt thick again, suffocating. The bird chatter cut out, even the breeze seemed to stop. He opened the car door with shaking hands, tossed his gear inside, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, refused to turn over. "No, no, no!" Elias slammed his fist against the steering wheel. He tried again. The engine whined but didn't catch. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and he knew, with a sinking certainty, that it wasn't a mechanical failure. He felt eyes on him. Slowly he looked up into the rearview mirror. Something moved between the distant trees. A massive, dark silhouette slipping behind a trunk. Then another. The forest seemed to shift as though rearranging itself, hiding something too large to disappear naturally. "No, please." His breath fogged the inside of the glass. He grabbed his phone. No bars, not even a flicker. He tried starting the engine again. Nothing. A low thump echoed from the trees to his right. Then another. Heavy, muffled impacts, like something hitting the ground with enormous weight. Elias jerked around, staring out every window at once. The thumps grew louder, closer. Then everything went quiet. The silence stretched so long, he almost convinced himself it was over, until a deep, resonant knock boomed through the forest. A single hit, wood against something hard. Then another. A slower, heavier answer came from his left, as if 2 unseen giants were communicating tree knocking. Bigfoot behavior. Elias's pulse spiked. The knocks repeated, faster now, echoing back and forth through the woods, surrounding him in a rhythmic, unnerving pattern. They weren't just one. A chorus of knocks rolled through the forest, followed by a long, mournful howl that vibrated the car's windows. The sound was too powerful, too deep, to belong to any known animal. It rose in pitch, trailing into a guttural resonance that made Elias's bones ache. He curled forward in the driver's seat, covering his ears, but the sound lived inside him. It shook his teeth. It rattled his skull. When it finally faded, he lifted his head and saw movement directly behind the car. A towering shape stepped into view. Though the morning light wasn't strong, he could make out the details. Fur matted with dirt and pine needles, shoulders impossibly broad, arms hanging nearly to its knees. Its chest rose and fell slowly, like it was controlling its breath, controlling its presence. Its face was partly shadowed, but he saw enough. The deep-set eyes, the sloped brow, the thick leathery skin around its nose and mouth. A face that looked ancient, intelligent, focused. It stared at him through the rear windshield. Elias froze, unable to blink. The creature stepped closer. The car dipped as its weight shifted the ground. It lifted one hand, massive, black-furred, with fingers thick as branches, and placed its palm flat against the glass. The window flexed inward. Elias gasped. The creature leaned down, its eyes meeting his through the glass. And slowly, very slowly, it smiled. The thing's smile wasn't human. It stretched too wide, folding the creature's leathery skin into deep, predatory creases. Its lips were thin, almost non-existent, revealing huge teeth the color of worn bone. Not fangs, human-shaped teeth, but far too large, too square, too powerful. Elias couldn't breathe. His chest seemed locked by invisible hands. The creature's breath fogged the glass. Through the spreading patch of condensation, Elias could see those enormous eyes narrowing, studying him with a terrifying patience, like it enjoyed watching him struggle to understand what was happening. Then, without warning, the creature pushed on the rear windshield. The glass bowed inward with a sharp creaking sound. "Oh, God!" Elias scrambled toward the passenger seat, falling sideways over his cooler, nearly smashing his elbow against the dashboard. The car rocked slightly under the creature's pressure. Another push. The glass whined. A hairline crack spidered from the center. Elias lunged for the passenger door. This time it opened. He tumbled out onto the dirt and hit the ground hard, coughing as he scrambled to his feet. The forest blurred around him. He didn't look back. He could hear the creature snort as it leaned against the car again, metal groaning under its weight. He bolted toward the tree line. Branches whipped his arms and face, dirt sprayed from under his boots. He tore through brush and fern, lungs screaming as he gulped cold air. For a few precious seconds, he heard nothing behind him. No footsteps, no howls, no crackling brush. Maybe, just maybe, it had stayed with the car. Then a single thunderous footstep shook the forest floor. Elias tripped and nearly fell. Another step, and another, rhythmic, steady, impossibly fast. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. If he saw it, he might freeze. And freezing meant dying. His breath tore out of him in ragged bursts. His heart hammered so hard it felt like it might crack his ribs. He darted between two fallen logs, scrambled up a slope slick with pine needles, and sprinted along a narrow deer trail behind him. A massive tree trunk snapped like a matchstick. Not broken by wind, not rotted, just knocked aside. The sound of the tree falling rolled through the forest like distant thunder, shaking loose needles and sending small creatures skittering. Elias stumbled to a stop at the crest of a ridge. The woods below dropped into a steep ravine, choked with boulders and sharp, jagged stumps. He'd camped too deep, too far off trail. This wasn't a path anyone used. He swallowed hard. Going down meant breaking his neck. Staying meant being caught. A massive shape moved through the trees behind him. He jumped. His feet slid out from under him as he plummeted down the ravine, tumbling through dirt and brambles. Sharp sticks tore his sleeves, a rock scraped across his ribs. Something sliced his cheek open. He rolled and bounced and spun helplessly until he slammed into a tree trunk at the bottom. Air blasted from his lungs. For a moment he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Pain radiated from his ribs like a spreading fire. He groaned and forced himself to sit up. Above him, on the ridge, the creature appeared. Silhouetted by the morning sky, it looked impossibly huge, broader than any man, taller than any animal Elias could name. Its arms dangled at its sides, fingers curling into slow, deliberate fists. It stared down at him, head angled slightly, as if deciding the best way to descend. Then the creature raised its head and let out a roar so powerful the leaves around Elias vibrated. He slapped his hands over his ears, but the sound punched straight through them. It was deep and resonant, a mixture of rage and triumph. It sounded like a predator announcing the kill was certain. The Bigfoot stepped off the ridge. It didn't climb. It jumped. Elias's eyes widened in disbelief as the creature dropped 20 feet in a single bound, landing on its knuckles and feet like a massive gorilla. The ground shook. Dirt puffed outward around it. Elias scrambled backward, palms slipping on the rocky ground. The creature rose to full height and stared at him again, those dark eyes locking onto his with the cold certainty of something that had hunted many times before. With one step, it closed half the distance. Elias forced himself to his feet and sprinted deeper into the ravine. Pain shot through his side with every movement, but adrenaline smothered it. He grabbed a sapling for balance, swinging around it and bolting toward a cluster of fallen trees that formed a natural break in the forest floor. The creature followed, fast, too fast. Its heavy breaths echoed behind him, each exhale a wet, guttural gust. Elias could feel the vibrations of its steps through the soles of his boots. He zigzagged between the deadfall logs, hoping to slow it down. He slid under a massive trunk, the bark scraping his jacket. The creature didn't bother ducking. It smashed through the same trunk with one sweeping arm. Wood exploded into splinters. The log rolled aside like it weighed nothing. Elias yelped and sprinted harder. Up ahead, the ravine narrowed into a rocky chute, a wedge of stone that sloped steeply downward toward a shadowy gap. Elias didn't care what was down there. Cave? Drainage tunnel? Death pit? Didn't matter. It was the only way forward. He hurled himself into the chute. Loose stones tumbled with him. His ankles twisted painfully. He nearly fell again, catching himself on a thorn-covered branch that tore into his palm. The creature reached the top of the chute. For a moment it paused, studying the terrain. Those dark eyes flicked from Elias to the narrow gap below. It couldn't fit through. Not easily. The rock walls constricted too sharply. For the first time, Elias saw hesitation. The creature snarled. Not in fear, in fury. It reached one massive arm toward him, as if the distance itself offended it. Elias squeezed into the narrowing stone gap, feeling the cold rock press against his shoulders. Behind him, the creature roared again, this time with unmistakable anger. It couldn't reach him. Not yet. But it would find another way. It always did. The stone walls squeezed tight around Elias. As he pressed deeper into the narrow crack, every inhale scraped his ribs against cold rock. His shirt snagged on jagged edges. Dirt sifted down his neck in gritty, itching trickles. Behind him, the creature's roars throbbed through the ravine like shockwaves. Each one rattled the stones, sending pebbles cascading down the chute. The sound was too big for the forest, too big for anything natural. Elias kept crawling. The passage sloped downward into near darkness, narrowing until he had to turn his head sideways just to continue moving. His breath echoed off the stone, hot and uneven. His fingers trembled as he dragged himself inch by inch, half sliding, half clawing forward behind him. The sound changed. The creature wasn't roaring anymore. It was breathing, deep, slow, controlled. It was listening for him. Elias froze. The breath came again, a huge cavernous inhale, then a low exhale that vibrated the rocks around him. It sounded wet, like the lungs inside that massive chest were filled with heat and moisture. The creature sniffed. Elias's heart tripped. Another sniff, closer this time. It was tracking him through scent, following the air currents funneling through the crack. Elias forced himself to keep moving. His fingers brushed empty space. The passage widened slightly, just enough for him to tilt his body an inch forward faster. The floor dropped another foot, and suddenly he slid into a wider chamber. He landed awkwardly on his side, pain flaring through his bruised ribs. The chamber wasn't large, maybe 10 feet across, with a low ceiling of interlocking stone. Pale light filtered in through a thin slit above, painting ghostly shapes across the uneven walls. Elias staggered upright, gasping. The chamber wasn't natural. He saw markings, scratches, gouges, symbols. Long, claw-like furrows scored the stone, some deep enough to fit 2 fingers inside. Others were arranged in strange, deliberate patterns. 3 vertical slashes beside 2 horizontal ones, repeated over and over. Some spiraled into crude shapes that looked almost like faces. Primitive, territorial. Warnings. And there were bones, dozens of them, scattered across the floor like discarded toys. Deer, elk. Something smaller he prayed wasn't human. Many were broken open. The marrow sucked clean, Elias gagged. A low rumble rolled through the passage behind him. Dust drifted from the ceiling. He spun toward the narrow opening he'd crawled through, just in time to see a massive, fur-covered arm reaching in the hand was too large to fit. But the fingers curled through the crack, scraping stone and sending sparks flying. The creature was trying to widen the entrance. Each swipe of its claws shaved off slivers of rock. Bits of stone rained onto the chamber floor. No, no, please, Elias whispered, backing away until his shoulders pressed against the far wall. The creature growled, not loud but low and intimate, like it knew he was trapped and savoring the moment. The arm retracted. For a second, the passage fell silent. Then something slammed into the rock above the opening. The entire chamber shook. Dust exploded from the ceiling. A crack zigzagged along the stone arch overhead. Another impact. Louder. Harder. Stone chips flew. The creature wasn't trying to widen the crack. It was trying to collapse the chamber. Elias dove aside as a chunk of ceiling crashed down where he'd just been standing, the air filled with grit and choking dust. He coughed violently, eyes watering, lungs burning. He couldn't stay here. If the creature kept striking the rock, he'd be buried alive. He scanned the chamber desperately on the far wall, partially hidden behind a mound of bones. He spotted another fissure, thin, vertical, but open enough to squeeze through. He stumbled toward it, slipping on loose stones and bone fragments. Behind him, another impact boomed. The chamber quaked. A large slab of rock sheared off the ceiling and shattered inches from his feet. Elias shoved himself into the second fissure. The stone scraped his shoulders, tearing his shirt and skin, but he pushed harder, twisting his torso and forcing himself deeper. The crack narrowed. He sucked in his stomach, exhaled all the air in his lungs, and wormed farther in. His ribs screamed. His palms were raw and bleeding. Behind him, the chamber gave another tortured groan. Elias didn't look back. The fissure opened into a thin tunnel that sloped upward. A faint draft touched his face. Cold, fresh air. Light and exit. He clawed his way toward it. As he crawled, he heard the chamber collapse behind him. A thunderous roar of falling rock that sealed the entryway and shook dust loose all around him. Then silence. Total, suffocating silence. Elias kept moving until the tunnel widened enough to let him stand hunched. Pale daylight spilled down from a jagged opening above. An old rockfall, maybe, or a split in the hillside. He dragged himself up the last incline and burst into open forest, collapsing onto the mossy ground. He lay there gasping, staring at the trees overhead, trembling uncontrollably. His ears still rang. His hands shook violently. But he wasn't safe, because the forest was silent again. Matching footsteps, slow, deliberate, measured, echoed somewhere behind him. It had found another way around, and it was coming. Elias scrambled to his feet, heart hammering, and ran without thinking, twisting through the dense underbrush. The forest floor was uneven, roots and rocks tearing at his boots, branches whipping his face. Every step felt heavier than the last, every breath hotter, tighter, more desperate. He dared not look back, but the sense of being hunted pressed into him like a living weight. The forest behind him seemed to pulse with a dark rhythm, each shadow potentially alive, each rustle a threat. He stumbled, catching himself on a tree trunk, lungs screaming, and forced himself onward. The creature's presence was constant, though he couldn't see it. The ground vibrated with each massive footfall. He knew instinctively it was playing with him, letting him think he might escape. Then from somewhere up ahead, the undergrowth exploded. A massive arm slammed into a fallen tree, snapping it in half, sending bark and splinters flying. Elias screamed, his panic fueling his legs. He ran harder, darting through a narrow corridor of trees, zigzagging to throw off its aim. The creature didn't hesitate. It moved faster than any animal should, silent now except for the soft crunch of leaves and the occasional snap of a branch. Elias reached a clearing, the kind of open space that should have offered relief. But the creature wasn't far behind. It stepped into view at the edge of the trees, towering, massive, its fur matted and glinting in the filtered sunlight. It stopped, its eyes locked onto him, dark and intelligent, and then it grinned again. Elias skidded to a stop, chest heaving. He knew he couldn't outrun it here. His mind raced, trying to find something, anything to defend himself. Rocks, branches, a hollow log, anything. The creature crouched slightly. A predator preparing to strike Elias grabbed a branch from the ground, more for comfort than hope. The creature tilted its head, studying him, then lunged. The speed was terrifying. Elias swung the branch blindly as the creature passed, feeling it brush against his shoulder. He twisted, ran, slipped on loose dirt, and fell hard. Pain shot through his side. The creature loomed over him, the shadow of its massive body blotting out the trees behind it. Its breath washed over him, hot and fetid, its eyes boring into his soul. Elias froze, expecting the end. Then, almost playfully, it turned and bounded toward the far edge of the clearing, disappearing behind a stand of trees. Elias gasped, lungs burning, unsure why it had stopped. He took the moment to get to his feet, shaking violently, trying to rationalize the creature's behavior. Was it letting him go, or was it drawing him deeper into its domain? The ground shook rhythmically, violently, each step a drumbeat of predation. He ran blindly, heading toward a slope that descended into a fog-choked ravine. He slipped, tumbled, caught himself on a moss-covered boulder, and scrambled down the incline. Behind him, the pounding didn't slow. He could feel their presence, sense them weaving through the trees, coordinating, intelligent, relentless. He came upon a stream cutting through the valley, cold water rushing over smooth stones. Without hesitation, he plunged into it, the icy current stealing the breath from his lungs. He fought to stay upright, dragging himself through the water, praying it would mask his scent, his movements. Then the forest went silent, a deafening, unnatural silence that pressed down on him like a physical weight. He froze in the icy stream, heart hammering, muscles trembling, and then the water around him erupted. A massive hand shot out, grabbing a stone from the riverbed and hurling it past him, splashing water and sending a shock of terror through his body. He scrambled to the bank, soaked and shivering, adrenaline surging so fiercely it burned his veins. Up ahead, the trees thinned slightly, revealing a ridge that sloped upward. Elias climbed, gasping, dragging himself over rocks and roots, desperate for any vantage, any escape. At the top, he stumbled and nearly fell over a tree stump. He looked around. The forest stretched endlessly, dark and alien, but at least he had higher ground. He needed to keep moving, needed to survive, needed anything. Then the creature appeared again. Not one, not two, but three massive silhouettes emerging from the tree line, moving with terrifying grace. They stopped, studied him for a long moment, and then began circling. Elias's stomach dropped. He realized with horror that the clearing he had run toward earlier had been a trap. They had funneled him into it. Now he was surrounded, hemmed in. He clutched a jagged rock in his hand, teeth gritted, lungs screaming, every nerve alight with fear. They moved silently now, all three surrounding him with impossibly long strides. Elias backed up, forced to the center of the open ground. Nowhere left to run. He dropped to his knees, the rock shaking in his hand. The creatures paused, One stepped forward, towering above him. Its eyes glinted with curiosity and malevolent amusement. Then it crouched and let out a deep, resonant growl that reverberated in his chest. Elias froze, feeling the air itself compress around him. The other two advanced slowly, deliberately, cutting off any escape. He knew then the truth. They weren't going to let him leave. Not alive. The forest held its breath. The three creatures circled him, teeth bared, nostrils flaring, exuding a power older than time. Elias's knees hit the dirt. Every option was gone. He raised the rock, shaking, eyes darting, mind racing for anything that could save him. The lead creature lunged. The creature's massive fist slammed into the ground just inches from Elias, sending a shockwave through the dirt that knocked him backward. He rolled, twisting to avoid the crushing blow, scraping his side on jagged roots. His rock dropped into the dirt with a clatter. Panic clawed at his chest. He scrambled to his feet, but the creatures were already closing in, moving with terrifying speed, silent except for the soft crunch of leaves under enormous feet. Elias bolted toward a narrow gap in the trees, hoping he could slip between them. The lead creature lunged again, hands stretching impossibly wide, claws raking the air where his shoulder had been moments before. He dove through the gap, branches tearing at his face and arms. Behind him, the creatures crashed through the forest like living boulders, snapping saplings and shredding underbrush. Elias's lungs burned, his vision blurred with sweat and blood. He stumbled down a slope, slipping on loose dirt, his ankle twisting painfully. But he couldn't stop. Every second counted. They were relentless, intelligent, coordinated. He could hear them communicating in low growls and guttural noises, each sound perfectly timed, like a language older than humans. Ahead, he saw a fallen tree forming a bridge across a shallow ravine. He leapt, catching the trunk just in time, rolling across it and barely avoiding the jagged rocks below. The creatures didn't slow. One of them followed, bounding onto the log, bending it under its immense weight. The trunk cracked, splintering, but held. Elias scrambled off the other side, hearing the massive thud as the creature landed. He ran into thicker forest, hoping the tangle of trees would slow them, but they navigated it effortlessly, each stride calculated and deadly. His mind raced. He needed a plan. Something, anything. Then he spotted it. A hunting stand, abandoned and leaning precariously against a large pine. It wasn't much, but it offered vertical advantage. He sprinted toward it, muscles screaming in protest, clawed his way up the rickety ladder, pulling himself into the small platform just as the lead creature emerged from the trees below. It stopped, tilted its head, growled, and for the first time Elias saw its mouth curl into a grin, one of pure, intelligent malice. The other two circled the base of the tree, eyes glowing in the dim light. Elias tried to steady his breath, tried to quiet his shaking hands. Every instinct screamed to jump, run, fight, but the platform creaked under his weight. One wrong move, one snap, and he'd be dead, or worse, within reach. The lead creature reached up, arms stretching impossibly high, and slammed a massive hand against the tree. The trunk shivered, bark splintering, and the platform tilted dangerously. Elias slid back, gripping the edges, knuckles white. He could see the intelligence in their eyes. This wasn't mindless hunger. They were hunting him for sport, savoring every second of terror. One of the creatures let out a low, vibrating roar, and the sound rattled the hunting stand. Elias screamed, holding on for dear life as the platform rocked violently. He realized the stand couldn't hold them for long. He needed a way out. Spying the forest floor, he noticed a tangle of vines and low branches forming a natural swing between two trees. It was risky, nearly impossible, but it offered escape. Elias backed along the platform, measuring distance, muscles tensed. The lead creature lunged again, hands smashing through the wooden supports. He dove, catching the vines with both hands, and swung with every ounce of strength he had. Below, the creatures snapped at him, claws raking air. But he swung clear, landing hard in a pile of leaves. Pain shot through his side, ribs screaming, but he scrambled to his feet, legs wobbling. The creatures hesitated at the edge of the clearing, Growls low, deep, frustrated Elias darted into the underbrush, weaving between trees, branches lacerating his arms. He ran blindly, heart pounding, until he burst into a small creek. Water soaked his clothes, chilled him to the bone, but offered a momentary shield. The creature stopped at the creek, sniffing the air, growling, testing the waters. Elias ducked behind a fallen log, shivering, watching as they tried to find a path across. Then suddenly one of them charged the creek, splashing through, water spraying in violent arcs. Elias bolted upstream, running along the bank, slipping in the mud, barely keeping his footing. The creatures followed, relentless, unstoppable, hunting him with a precision that made his blood run cold. Somewhere ahead, he spotted a steep bank leading to a plateau. It was risky, slippery, but it offered higher ground and potential cover. He sprinted, legs burning, lungs screaming. One creature leapt after him, landing with a thud that shook the ground beneath him. He stumbled, grabbed a protruding root, and pulled himself up behind him. The creatures paused at the edge, growling, then leapt in unison. Elias ran like he had never run before, his mind consumed by one thought: survive. Every branch, every rock, every shadow was a threat. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. The hunt had only begun. Elias scrambled across the plateau, chest heaving, lungs on fire. The forest stretched endlessly below, dark and silent, except for the distant rhythmic pounding of those enormous feet. His ankle throbbed, ribs ached, and his vision blurred from exhaustion, but he forced himself onward. The plateau narrowed into a rocky ridge, jagged stones cutting into his palms as he climbed. He glanced over his shoulder. The creatures were close, emerging from the trees with horrifying speed. Their eyes glinted, intelligent and cruel, mouths open in silent snarls. Panic surged through him. Every instinct screamed to run, but the rocky path offered few options. He slipped, catching himself on a sharp stone, scraping his forearm raw. One of the creatures reached the edge of the plateau and let out a guttural roar, echoing off the canyon walls, shaking him to his core. Elias darted along the ridge, each step more precarious than the last. Below him, the drop was sheer. One misstep meant instant death. But the creatures didn't care. They were faster, more agile than any normal predator, bounding effortlessly over uneven terrain. Elias reached a narrow ledge, barely wide enough for 1 foot at a time. He hugged the rock face, inching forward, heart hammering. Behind him, the lead creature lunged, missing by mere inches. Rocks tumbled from the ridge, clattering into the canyon below. The sound was deafening, but the creature didn't slow. It didn't hesitate. Elias's mind raced. He needed a plan, something desperate. Ahead, he saw an overhang jutting out. It looked fragile, possibly able to support only a fraction of his weight. But it was his only chance. He sprinted toward it, adrenaline surging, arms flailing. He leapt, catching the edge with his hands, legs dangling. The creature stopped at the edge of the ridge, snarling, peering over. The lead one tilted its massive head, studying him. Sniffing the air, Elias gritted his teeth and swung himself up onto the overhang, body pressed against the rock. The ledge creaked under his weight. Below, the canyon yawned, dark and infinite. One misstep now would mean oblivion. The creatures roared in frustration. They didn't jump. Instead, they began to circle the base of the overhang, growling low, communicating in guttural, coordinated tones. Elias realized they weren't just hunting, they were strategizing. His mind raced. He needed a distraction, something to draw them away. He spotted a large boulder a few feet down. It was loose, perched precariously on the canyon slope. Risking it, he grabbed a fallen branch, shoved it at the boulder, and watched as it tumbled down, smashing into rocks below with a thunderous roar. The creatures froze for a moment, startled, then growled, their attention momentarily diverted. Elias seized the chance. He climbed along the narrow ledge, inching toward a small crevice in the rock face. It was tight, barely enough for him, but it offered cover. He squeezed through, heart racing, chest burning, hoping the creatures wouldn't follow. Inside the crevice, it was dark and cold. Elias pressed his back against the rock, trying to slow his frantic breathing. He could hear them circling outside, their low growls vibrating through the stone. One of them stepped onto the ledge, peering into the crevice. Its breath was hot, and the stench of wet fur and predator filled the narrow space Elias held perfectly still, praying his body would be invisible in the shadows. The creature sniffed the air, tilted its massive head, then let out a frustrated roar. The others growled, scratching at rocks below, but they didn't enter the crevice. Hours seemed to pass. Elias didn't move, didn't breathe more than necessary. His body ached, muscles trembling, every nerve on fire. Finally, the creatures retreated, moving back into the forest, leaving the plateau silent once more. Elias stayed in the crevice, chest heaving, eyes wide, until the echoes of their footsteps faded completely. Slowly, cautiously, he eased out, limbs stiff, body screaming in pain. The forest below was dark and quiet. For now. He knew it wasn't over. They had let him live, but only temporarily. Their hunt had rules he didn't understand, and he had survived only because he had outsmarted them for a moment. He climbed down the rocky slope, using every bit of strength left in his body, bloodied, bruised, and trembling. At the bottom, the forest swallowed him in shadow, and he ran again, moving deeper into the darkness, heart pounding, muscles screaming, mind numb with terror. Somewhere hidden in the trees, the creatures watched, patient, calculating, waiting. Elias didn't know how long he could keep running, how long he could survive. He only knew one thing. The hunt wasn't over, and the forest was alive with horrors beyond his comprehension. Elias stumbled through the forest, every muscle screaming, lungs burning. Darkness pressed in from all sides, branches slapping his face, roots clawing at his feet. He didn't dare stop. Somewhere behind him, the creatures watched, patient, intelligent, lethal. He had escaped the plateau, but he could feel them everywhere, silent, just beyond the trees, sniffing, listening, hunting. His ankle throbbed, ribs ached, but he forced himself onward, deeper into the forest, toward anything that might be civilization. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Every sound made him flinch. A rustle, a snap, a bird taking flight. He imagined them all as threats, imagined their massive shadows stepping through the trees. Eventually, the forest thinned slightly, a faint path appearing, worn perhaps by humans or animals. He followed it blindly, hope mingling with terror. Then he saw it, the faint glow of a distant campsite, lights flickering, smoke curling into the night sky. Relief surged, wild and desperate. He ran toward it, stumbling over roots, slipping in mud, dragging himself through the underbrush. The smell of fire and human presence filled his nostrils, bringing tears to his eyes. He burst onto the edge of the campsite. People turned in shock, faces pale, questioning. Elias didn't speak. He collapsed onto the ground, shaking, soaked, bleeding, terrified. One of the campers helped him to his feet, murmuring questions, but he couldn't answer. He could only point behind him, toward the forest. No one looked, but he knew. The forest was alive with the unseen, the hunters that moved faster, thought smarter, and were far older than humanity. That night, the creatures didn't follow. Perhaps they let him go. Perhaps they were patient. Perhaps they were still out there, waiting for the next mistake. Elias huddled by the fire, shivering, staring into the darkness beyond the campsite. Every crackle of the flames sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to shift with a terrible intelligence. Sleep never came. He didn't dare close his eyes. He couldn't. He had survived, barely, but he knew the truth. The forest had claimed him as prey, and though he had escaped, the hunt was far from over. And somewhere out there, deep in the blackness of trees older than memory, massive fur-covered figures lurked, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, waiting for him.